What in the world are you doing here?
When a private investigator tracked down the missing heir to the city's largest bank, he didn't find him in a penthouse. He found him hiding as a $40 a week tenant on a bankrupt farm.
You sat at my kitchen table and watched me count pennies to pay your rent, knowing your family's bank was the one taking my home.
Mr. Cornwell? Your father has had the police looking for you for 2 weeks. What are you doing out here?
Roger! Walk away!
He was supposed to sign the paperwork to ruin her family. Instead, he stole the files, changed his name, and knocked on her door begging for a room.
The man who knocked on Ellie Doran's door that November evening carried a rain-soaked duffel bag and an accent that didn't belong anywhere near her stretch of county road. And it was the accent, not the bag, that made her hesitate before she let him in. She'd posted the room for rent 3 days earlier, more out of desperation than hospitality. The bank had sent its second notice about the mortgage that week, and $40 a week for the spare room above the barn was $40 she didn't have another way to get. Ellie was 31, ran the family apple orchard alone since her mother's stroke, and had gotten very good at not thinking too hard about numbers that didn't add up. The man said his name was Daniel. Nothing more. When she asked what brought him to a town this small, he said he was between things, and looked, for just a second, like a man deciding how much of the truth he could afford to spend. She should have asked more questions. She didn't. He paid the first week in cash, folded bills still creased from a wallet, and flinched. Barely, but she caught it. When she mentioned she banked with Cornwell Trust, the one lender left in the county who hadn't already turned her down for a refinance. She thought it was embarrassment. Poor men got funny about banks. By the second week, he'd fixed the tractor's ignition without being asked, working with a quiet precision that told her he'd done more with his hands than between things usually implied. He never spoke about family, never spoke about money, except once, to say he didn't have much of it left to speak of. When Pastor Whitfield gently suggested, the way pastors do when they're worried about a woman's reputation, that a man staying alone above a widow's daughter's barn might raise talk in town, Daniel was the one who looked rattled, not Ellie. "You don't owe this town an explanation," she told him one night on the porch steps, the cold making her voice come out steadier than she felt. "But I want you to know I don't need looking after. I need someone who pays rent and doesn't ask questions about mine." "That's not obligation," he said, and something in the way he said it made her look at him twice. "I don't have much to offer you, Ellie. Not the way this town would count it." She'd laughed, soft and tired. "I'm not counting anything, Daniel. I'm just trying to keep the lights on till spring." He never argued with that. Something about the plainness of it, a woman who wanted nothing from him but rent and silence, seemed to be exactly what he hadn't known he needed. Before we continue the story, let us know in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is over there. Someone near you might be watching too. Also, hit the subscribe button in order not to miss other interesting stories. Daniel Cornwell had never once, in 34 years, gone a full week without someone wanting something from him. His family's name was on the bank at the center of town, the same Cornwell Trust that had sent Ellie Doran 2 increasingly unfriendly letters about her mortgage. He hadn't taken the room above her barn by accident. He'd taken it because 6 months earlier, standing in a boardroom listening to his father's loan officers discuss which family farms to expedite through foreclosure, he'd heard Ellie Doran's name on a list, and something about it, he still couldn't explain what, had made him get in his car instead of going home. He told himself he only wanted to see who was on the other end of the letters his family's bank kept sending. He hadn't expected to want to stay. It had happened before, in smaller ways. A woman in the city who'd loved him fiercely, right up until she learned the last name on his credit cards, after which every kindness she offered came stitched with a second meaning he could never quite trust again. Ellie had never once looked at him that way. She looked at him like a man who could fix a tractor and pay his rent on time, and nothing more. He hadn't known how starved he was for exactly that kind of nothing. So when the moment came to tell her, and there had been moments, a dozen evenings on the porch where the truth sat right behind his teeth, he found himself swallowing it down instead. Just a little longer. Just until he was sure what she'd do with it. The problem was, Cornwell Trust wasn't as far from that farmhouse as he'd have liked. On a gray Thursday morning, a car Ellie didn't recognize pulled up the gravel drive. Sharp suit, county plates, a man asking for directions to the Cornwell property, who stopped mid-sentence at the sight of Daniel repairing the fence line in the yard. The man's face went pale. He took off his sunglasses. "Mr. Cornwell," he said, "your father's been trying to reach you for 2 weeks." Ellie, standing in the doorway with flour still dusted across her hands from that morning's bread, felt the ground tilt sideways beneath her. "Mr. Cornwell," the man said again, softer. Glancing between Daniel and Ellie like he was doing arithmetic, he didn't want to finish out loud. "That's enough, Roger." Daniel's voice came out low, a warning. Roger closed his mouth, though his eyes kept flicking toward Ellie, trying to work out who she was to the man he'd been sent to find. Daniel finally turned. He didn't look at Roger. He looked at Ellie. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Her face had already asked it plainly enough. "Is it true?" And the answer was written all over his, in the way he couldn't quite meet her eyes, in the way his hand hovered near hers like he wanted to reach for it and didn't trust that she'd let him. "Ellie, don't." Her voice wasn't sharp. It was worse than sharp. It was quiet, careful, like she was holding something together by sheer will. "Don't say my name like you're about to explain something I should already know. I wanted to tell you." "When?" Something cracked through the calm now. "Before or after I handed you the key to my mother's room? Before or after I told you about the second notice, Daniel, the one from your bank, and watched you nod along like you didn't already know exactly how many days I had left?" Roger wisely said nothing, though he shifted like a man who badly wished to be anywhere else. Daniel stepped toward her. "I never lied about who I was as a man. Everything you know about me, that's true. I fixed your tractor because I wanted to. I liked hearing about your mother's orchard because it was good, not because I was performing for you. But you let me believe you were broke." Her voice shook now, though she fought to keep it steady. "You let me talk about counting pennies in front of the one person who could have ended it with a phone call. You let me play the fool, Daniel, in my own kitchen." "You were never the fool." His jaw tightened. "You're the only person who's ever looked at me and seen a man, not a name on a letterhead. Do you understand what that's worth to someone like me?" Ellie opened her mouth, then closed it. Something in his words had landed somewhere true, somewhere she didn't want to examine yet. Not with Roger still standing in her front yard like an unwanted witness to the worst morning of her year. "I need you to leave," she finally said. "I can't think with you standing there." He didn't argue. He nodded once, said something too low for her to hear to Roger, and the two of them walked back toward the car, leaving her alone in the doorway with flour going cold on her hands, and a truth that suddenly felt like a stranger's coat she'd been wearing without knowing it. By morning, word had reached half the county, because word always did. Her Aunt Carol showed up before the sun had cleared the tree line, out of breath. "Is it true? They're saying your Daniel is one of the Cornwells, the bank Cornwells. Ellie, do you understand what that family's worth?" "I know what it means, Carol." Ellie's voice was flat, exhausted. She wasn't hurt because he was rich. She'd never once dreamed of money, wouldn't have known what to do with a fortune if it landed in her lap. She was hurt because for 6 weeks she'd told him real things about her mother's stroke, about the mortgage keeping her up at night, about how frightened she was of losing the only life she'd ever known. And he had let her say all of it to a man who could have fixed it with a signature and simply chose, every single day, not to. It was Roger, of all people, who gave her the peace she hadn't known she needed. He'd stayed on at the end of the drive, waiting for word from Daniel about what came next. And Ellie found him sitting on the porch steps 2 days later, looking like a man who badly wanted to be back in the city. "He's not what you think," Roger said, when she sat down near him, more out of exhaustion than any wish for company. "The Cornwells I've worked for are hard people, Ellie. They'd have foreclosed on this place the day they found out he was staying here and made you feel small for ever having let him in. Daniel's not like that. He quietly wrote off 11 mortgages last winter after the flooding. Never let his name near the paperwork. told his father he didn't want thanks for doing what any decent bank should have done anyway. Ellie said nothing, but she was listening. He spent his whole life being loved for the wrong reasons, Roger went on, quieter now. Women who wanted the name, men who wanted the credit line. I've worked for that family 11 years, and I've never once seen him look at anybody the way he looks at you. Whatever else he got wrong, ma'am. That part wasn't a lie. That evening, Ellie found Daniel exactly where she expected, mending the same stretch of fence where the tractor had first broken down, as if some part of him needed to keep returning to the place where none of this had been complicated yet. Roger told me about the flood write-offs, she said. He looked up, startled, a little embarrassed. That wasn't meant to be a story people told. That's rather the point, isn't it? She sat on the fence rail, watching him work. You've spent your whole life giving without letting anyone trace it back to you because you didn't trust what they do with the knowing. And then you found a woman who wanted nothing from you but rent and quiet, and you couldn't bring yourself to end it because it was the first honest thing anyone had ever given you. That's about the truth of it, he admitted. I'm still angry, she said. I want you to know that. It doesn't go away in 2 days, just because Roger told me a story about a flood, but I understand it better than I did. She looked down at her hands, rough from years of orchard work that had nothing to do with fortune or name. I think some part of me has been afraid this whole time that I wasn't fit for a real life, only for whatever life a broke tenant could offer me. Finding out you had everything and chose me anyway without me knowing to perform for it. That's harder to sit with than I expected. It means I have to actually believe I was chosen, not just convenient. You were never convenient, Ellie. Daniel set down his tools, came and stood in front of her, careful, like a man approaching something he was afraid to startle. I've sat through more boardrooms and galas than I can count, surrounded by women who knew exactly what to say to a Cornwell. You never once knew what to say to a Cornwell, because you never met one. You only ever met me. She let him take her hand. The mortgage was paid off within the month, not by Daniel writing a check to rescue her, but by Ellie signing the papers herself, using funds from a trust her own grandmother had left her, and Daniel had quietly discovered buried in unclaimed county records. He'd wanted her to own her freedom outright, on paper, in her own name, before anything else between them went further. They were married the following spring in the same small church where Ellie's parents had married decades before. No Cornwell Trust event planners, no 500 guests. Daniel's father came, visibly moved and a little bewildered to find his son's bride in a plain green dress, politely declining every offer of something finer. They stayed at the orchard. Daniel's choice, not a compromise she'd asked of him. He said he'd spent enough of his life in rooms too large to fill with anything but silence, and would rather spend his mornings in an orchard with soil under his fingernails. He did, eventually, put some of his family's resources to use, not to change who Ellie was, but to hire the hands she'd needed for years, to make sure the winters ahead were never again something to fear. By the following harvest, there was a child on the way, and Daniel took to walking Ellie slowly along the same fence line where the tractor had first broken down that November evening, her hand in his, talking softly about names. Nothing grand, nothing that announced a fortune. Just names that sounded like home. He never did stop coming back to mend that same stretch of fence, long after it needed no more mending. Ellie never asked him to stop. Some things she'd learned weren't about repair at all. They were about remembering exactly where a thing had begun. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to the channel and give the video a thumbs up. Thanks for watching.